insane was working 50 hours a week in some office for 50 years, at the end of which they tell you to piss off, ending up in some retirement village, hoping to die before suffering the indignity of trying to make it to the toilet on time. Wouldn't you consider that to be insane?
So what's your podcast about?
Oh, it's about psychology, true crime, supernatural stuff, the occasional paranormal or philosophical rant.
Well, maybe I could check it out sometime.
If you had one shot, one opportunity to seize everything that you ever wanted in one moment, would you capture it or let it slip?
You know, as we come to the end of this phase of our life, we find ourselves trying to remember the good times and trying to forget the bad times. And we find ourselves thinking about the future. You start to worry, thinking, what am I going to do? Where am I going to be in 10 years?
My experience, if you spend a lot of time thinking about the pain from your past, well, it's probably not a good thing. Most people don't handle it well. Take care of yourself.
Well, what about you? What do you do when you can't forget the awful things from your past?
I find the awful thing, and I kill it.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. There's a peculiar instinct in modern life to exile what disturbs us. We rename it, medicate it, scroll past it, but we rarely face it. Yet if there's one consistent witness across history, myth, and the inner life, it is this. What we refuse to see does not disappear. It waits, and eventually, it's going to speak through dreams, through reactions, through the sudden, disproportionate surge of emotion that seems to come from nowhere. The shadow is not merely darkness. It is disowned light turned inward, twisted by neglect. To transmute darkness, then, is not to destroy it, it is to encounter it, to give it language, to recognize that what we fear in ourselves often carries the raw material of transformation. And one of the clearest maps we have for this process doesn't come from any kind of psychology textbook. It comes from old stories, the ones that survive because they told the truth symbolically when we could not bear it literally. Consider the Brothers Grimm tale known as the Handless Maiden. The father, a millwright, desperate, blind to his ambition, unknowingly bargains his daughter to the devil in exchange for wealth. When the devil comes to claim her, he cannot touch her because of her purity. So the father, in a horrifying act, cuts off her hands to make her vulnerable. Wow, at first glance, the story feels brutal, almost non-human, but psychologically, it is uncomfortably precise. The father represents the part of us that trades integrity for gain, like status, control, or approval. The maiden is the soul, the innocent center, and the cutting off of her hands, that is the loss of agency. The moment we betray ourselves so deeply that we feel powerless, severed from our ability to act in alignment with truth, this is where shadow work begins. It's here, and the recognition of where we have become handless. Where have you surrendered your voice to keep peace? Where have you numbed yourself to avoid conflict? Where have you allowed fear, pride, or desire to dictate your actions? These are not abstract questions. They show up in the body, in every hesitation, in every resentment, in all those patterns you repeat despite knowing better. In the story, the maiden does not fight. She simply goes away. This part of the story matters because integration is not immediate. It's not an overnight conquest of the shadow. It often begins with separation, with the need to step out of the environment or out of the mindset that created the wound. So, the maiden, she wanders. She's vulnerable and dependent until she arrives at a magical garden. It's there that she is cared for, slowly restored and healed a little bit, but she's still incomplete. She's still missing her hands. This part of the story is often overlooked. We want immediate wholeness, immediate power, but the psyche doesn't work that way. There's a season where you must live consciously with your limitations. Don't deny them. Don't rush past them. You need to allow yourself to see them clearly, because that is where we are broken. And then something strange happens in our story. Over time, our maiden's hands begin to grow back. It's not instantaneously. It's not this snap of the fingers miracle. But it's a gradual, enduring humility and a refusal to let her suffering define her identity that allows them to grow back. This is the core of shadow integration. What was lost through unconsciousness can be restored through awareness. But I've got to give you another layer, something a little bit deeper, and people often miss it. Within this story, within the maiden's journey, some of the things aren't erased. She still remembers her father's betrayal. She remembers her own mutilation. Those parts of the story remain. You got to understand, when we become whole, when we are integrated, there's not some kind of amnesia, but the wounds are incorporated and we begin to understand them, and the shadow is not something you discard. It is something you learn to carry without being controlled by it. So what does that look like in practice? Well, it begins with observation. Pay attention to what triggers you. And I don't mean like the small things. I do mean those things that trigger you that are disproportionate to the situation. Like the person who irritates you beyond all reason. The criticism that lingers longer than it should, plays in your mind over and over. That reoccurring dream that's been leaving you unsettled for days. All of those are entry points. They're all mirrors. And they're all reflecting aspects of yourself that have been pushed into the dark. What comes next is our own ownership. And so we don't ask, why are they like this? We start asking, where is this in me? We're not talking about self-condemnation. This is an honest inventory. You need to examine yourself. The arrogance you despise may be a disowned confidence. The anger you fear may be some kind of suppressed boundary. The weakness you mock in others may be your own vulnerability that you've denied. And another thing, expression, right? The shadow does not integrate through suppression. It integrates through conscious expression. Now, this might mean speaking the truth where you once stayed silent, or setting limits where you once yielded. We're talking about setting boundaries, creating, writing, building, all of these things to give form to what was previously hidden from you. The Brothers Grimm fairy tales endure throughout time because they refuse to lie about the human condition. They tell us that transformation is costly, that darkness is real, and that redemption is not found in denial, but in our descent into the shadow, into the underworld, and through our return to the light. To face the shadow is to walk into the forest willingly, knowing that something in you must die, but also trusting that something more can emerge. It's not perfect, but you'd be integrated. And that is far more dangerous in the best possible way.
Lacerated nebula. eternal sigh, eternal suffocation.
We spend our lives carrying wounds we struggle to articulate, quiet fractures beneath the surface, shaping every thought, fear, longing. Most people move through the world unaware of the shadows trailing behind them, unaware that the stories they tell themselves were often written by pain or trauma, not by truth. But there comes a moment, sometimes gentle, sometimes catastrophic, when the soul begins to demand its own unveiling, when the masks crack, when the old narratives refuse to hold. In that moment, we turn inward, toward the hidden places, embracing shadow work to uncover the authentic self while healing invisible wounds. Joining us is author, researcher, depth psychologist. She is the oracle of the mind, the cartographer of the inner realms, the dream walker of the psyche. Melissa Kim Korter, welcome back to Truth and Shadow podcast.
Oh, thank you, BT. I love these openings so much. Your words are very, really profound. So much depth. I kind of feel like I go into a little meditative state as you go into that. So thank you for having me back.
Well, thank you. I try. One of the major reasons why I had reached out was you had released a new book through a new publisher for yourself, Apothecary for the Afflicted, and then the subtitle is Shadow Work for Invisible Wounds. And I really love the cover. I really love the blurbs. I really like the editorial reviews on this book. I'll make sure there's links in the show notes. But besides this book, let's talk about where you're at, anything that you want to link, drop, tell people that you're working on that's not directly related to this book. And then we can get on to the subject matter within it.
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity. At this point in time, I am so deep in the depths of my dissertation. I'm coming to the end of this long 5-year path. I mean, it started years before that with other levels of education and work, but the last 5 years of really working with this idea of psychopathy and the human shadow. And that kind of, for a lack of a better way of saying it, has been all consuming in the best ways possible. But it's really the entirety of my world right now. Beside promoting this book, I am working on a shadow work experience that's called Death Becomes Her. And it is about breaking down the identity of who we are into who we're becoming. And you might have heard the term like ego death, or ego side. So it's also the idea that the ego goes through this death rebirth process as we move through different types of tension and life experiences. So that's something I'm excited about that I hope to have ready to go this winter. We'll see how far. It just depends on how much of my life force energy is to go into this dissertation first before I can bring that to form. You can find my work at melissacorter.com. And then I also have a Substack blog called Hauntingly Beautiful Things. All of that is also on melissacorter.com. That's where all the good stuff is. My research, my writing, all the happenings, all the stuff that's kind of percolating in my soul at the moment is on that website.
Fantastic. Yeah, so this book, this seems to be a new endeavor for you with this book because we were talking about how you decided to go ahead with an actual publisher instead of just doing a self-publishing. Let's talk about that process and let's talk about what it was that you put forward to say, hey, I want to write this book and I have a manuscript idea here. Let me tell you about it. Do you want it?
That's such a great question because there's so many pieces to it, but to kind of try to break it down into a simplified form, this book had been in motion for about 7 years now. I had been writing it and I knew I was working on a book. Like I knew that was going to be what the project was. I didn't know the form though. I started with a radically different idea, which was basically pouring out some of my stories and some of my most traumatic and tragic moments and trying to show the other side of what healing and, harmony and things like that look like. And then I went into my most intense dark night of the soul. And that period was like the hardest thing I've ever had to go through in my life. And every part of what I wrote for years and years and years leading up to that time no longer fit. And I went, I can't even put this forward. So part of me was heartbroken, to be honest. It's like, what did I just do? I spent all of this time and energy really, I mean, I was up at 4 a.m. and I was just giving everything to this book. Then I go through that experience and it was almost like a stranger looking at someone's words. Like they weren't familiar to me. I couldn't even identify with the person who wrote them. And that inspired me in a way. I thought, okay, I've got to make something of this mess. I've always had a really amazing connection to my instincts, to my intuition. And in that moment, my intuition was like, don't throw this away. Let it kind of go through what you went through, which was basically this death rebirth process. So I sat down after months of kind of being devastated, grieving the book I thought I was going to write. A whole other one emerged. And it is now I see why I couldn't do what I originally set out to write. So that in itself was kind of like the huge aha lesson. Like this thing I thought I desperately wanted so bad to be a certain way needed to go through its own transformation, which taught me a lot about the creative process and tending to the soul of what wants to actually move through you into form. And that's how I see this book. So on the heels of all of that, and I just trusted my instincts and went all in. I kept writing and writing and writing. And at this time, I didn't have a publisher. I had already self-published many other projects. And something in me was like, you want to expand with this. And so I kind of put some feelers out. I was asking around. I had some referrals and resources, but I kept getting all these closed doors, right? And it was not necessarily rejection letters, but kind of like dead ends. They just weren't going anywhere. And then I came across this website for Muse Oracle Press. I believe it might have been a social media post that actually led me to them. And I was looking at the website and I was like, okay, this isn't my typical darker, edgier kind of vibe like in my writing, but there's something about the imagery and the vibe of the website that spoke to me. So I downloaded their submission guidelines and I just let it sit. And it was like a couple weeks would go by and I would think about it. And I kept feeling like, no, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. A couple weeks go by, same process over and over. Then one day, this is so wild, but it's often how my instincts work. My husband had to take a trip. So he was going to be gone for 2 days. And I'm like, what am I going to do with myself? Our son was away and it was kind of like a very rare occurrence when the house is quiet and I have it to myself. And I pulled out the submission guidelines. It felt like such an instinctual thing. There was like almost like no thought, but I went right to it. And I was like, okay, I need to have a manuscript idea. I need to have, and there was a lot of information that I had to put together. Something that in a typical sense probably would have taken me about 3 or 4 weeks to gather, to do market research, to put, proposal, all of that. I sat down and I hammered it out in 8 hours. I put the whole thing together. I also found out that particular day was a really intense solar eclipse. So I thought it was wild that everybody I knew was like driving to whatever location to go see this, astrological event occur. And I'm going deep into the cavern of my little writing cave and I'm not coming out. It was like the opposite. And I just trusted that impulse. And I hammered the whole thing out, like I said, in about 8 hours or so, had it done that night. I submitted it. I kind of sent it off like, hey, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And it's so funny because the little, the automated like kickback email I received was something like, thank you. They were very kind and courteous, but you might not hear from us. And if you do, it could be months or whatever, something like that. I let it go 100% and I went to bed. By the time I got up in the morning, I had an email, and she said, "I'm enthralled with your writing. Let's talk." And it was just everything from there took off. But it was really that process of, I know that if I would have tried to hold on to my old self, this book wouldn't be here right now. I'd still be fighting for an old version of me that needed to die. So this is really the manifestation of surrender, is the way I like to think of it. Doing my own shadow work to present something on shadow work.
It's awesome. One of the things that I really like is when authors can take a book and have it be, I'll use the word medicine, have it be medicine in a way that's designed to help people through, oh my gosh, through their psychic mess, right? They're just their mental anguish or whatever it is. And tell me about the name for this book. This is the thing that I really was drawn to, because taking names have like this level of power that I think is so missed today, because we just throw out words. We're English speakers. We just say things and we don't think about definitions or the deeper meaning of a word. You know, apothecary for the afflicted. Right off the bat, it just tells me that this is some kind of medicine shop that's going to help with where I'm at as an afflicted person, either self or, whatever's going on. Tell me about the process of the name, because I don't think names just come to us out of the blue. I think there's usually some kind of level of inspiration.
Yes, great question. This book, it is medicine. It is medicine. And that, I don't mean that in an egoic way to say, oh, I wrote it and therefore I think it's going to do all these things. I know it is because it helped me before I could even help others. It had a transformational impact, just putting the pieces together in such a way I didn't expect. And the way that it came through me was also super unique, which then kind of equated to the title. So apothecary, in a typical sense, we're used to hearing about potions and elixirs and things, it might be herbal or something else, some type of, like you said, a medicine chest or a medicine cabinet, or something where there's going to be this alchemical process of bringing these ingredients together for a certain intention. Usually it's symptomatic, right? Sometimes it's for something physical going on and to bring the body back into balance. And I wanted something that had that impact, but psychologically, emotionally, energetically, and somatically through the body. And I hadn't found anything that really was kind of speaking to me. And one of the things that I've always kind of believed in as a writer is a lot of times we're writing for ourselves. We're writing for what we wanted that we didn't have. We're meeting our own needs, right? Through childhood, through adolescence. And so the medicine chest idea, the apothecary, I started thinking and feeling into that. And honestly, it was such an intuitive thing and how it moved through. I kind of like almost dismissed it because it seemed unique, but almost too simple at first. So I kept writing down words like apothecary and medicine chest. And I'm like, that's not it. There's more. So I put that on the side. And as I was writing the book, I was like, what am I speaking to here? What is going on? Each chapter was about shadow. Each chapter was about darkness. And it wasn't just about darkness, but the way that each chapter came to me, it started with something very much like a fairy tale that would sound like she who was thrown into darkness. And I was like, ooh, what does that even mean? And then it was like, every chapter kind of starts with that sort of concept. Now, obviously, I don't care about masculine, feminine, male, female, none of that. It's like whoever feels called to this, if it resonates with you, it's for you. Don't get lost in the appearance of he, she, and all of that. Just listen to what speaks to your soul. But the afflicted part, that too, it was such kind of almost like an edgy word. Like there's something about it that I feel like we can resonate with as human beings. When we hear the word affliction, it's like, okay, there's something to that. But there's almost if we're not being fully honest with ourselves, there might even be a little bit of wanting to distance ourselves from that word. And I know for me that was true. And I am all about how can I confront and look at these things within myself and pay attention to what disturbs me, pay attention to what upsets me, what leaves me unsettled, in a way where I can learn from that. And so that word affliction, afflicted, what does that even mean? And then I kind of started to make fun of it a little bit. Like, well, we're all afflicted with something. We've all got something. Maybe for some it's an addiction. Maybe for some it's a compulsion or a repetitive pattern or something we don't like about ourselves. And anything that becomes a repetitive behavior over time, like our rituals kind of are what turn into our patterns. And I was like, what if we're just afflicted with patterns? It kind of takes the charge out of it a little bit and makes it feel a little bit more empowering to work with. And so eventually those two words came together. It took some time because I actually had them in very different ways. Originally, the book was going to be something like The Echo of Invisible Wounds or something. And I was like, no, I'm not feeling that. That's not it. Then it was like, the ghosts of the psyche. And I'm like, no, that's not it. But I did want it to speak to all of those things in a way where I feel like when we can feel something, it has a way of settling so deeply within us versus if I'm just reading with my logical mind and I have to figure it out, I'm doing all the heavy lifting. But if you can present to me a symbol or a word or something that still has the soul in it, I'm going to pay attention. And these words, when they came together, somehow that's what it did for me. I was like, ooh, apothecary for the afflicted. There's something. I don't know what, but there's something. And it seems to speak to whatever it is I'm trying to contain within the pages of this book.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of individuals out there that need to have parts of their selves addressed in a way that's non-confrontive, right? It's there's this really weird saying that it's harder to it's easy to forgive other people, it's hard to forgive ourselves. And then there's even this within like veterinary medicine. It says that a pet owner is more likely to spend thousands of dollars for their pet but not go and get their annual exam. I mean, so it's really common for us to deal with everything outside, a lot of external locus, and just trying to to bother a song from Seether. We're just trying to fake it, right? And I think that this kind of study, this kind of research, this kind of project to address the shadow self, and do some egocide, as you said earlier, is a great way for individuals to learn that we can be better versions of ourselves. And some things don't work for everybody. I have yet to find one specific kind of thing that is a Swiss Army knife that has all the tools for every person. And I really think that this is a good thing to do. And I'm curious as to, I don't know, when we write these books, we're looking at an audience. And I know that you have quite a history of stuff. We've had other interviews where we've talked about a lot of your own past and your own, where you are and where you come from and things. But, was this written to, did you have like somebody that you wanted to write this to, or were you writing it to yourself?
I'd say both, really, both. 80% of it was me writing to myself, writing to the forgotten places and spaces and the way I abandoned myself and the way I found myself again and the way I recommitted to that path and what does that look like and feel like. But it doesn't sound that way. It's all done through metaphor and fairy tales and examples, but it's still me speaking to those different parts of me. The other thing is, I've worked with private clients and in groups and things like that, and done a lot of mentoring and for over 20 years. And I started my career doing intuitive readings for people. And something that I noticed in that time that kind of came back full circle when I was writing this book is how many people were really afraid to dig in and get to know themselves a little more. But I also noticed this other pattern of when they were offered suggestions or tools that could actually help them, they had a hard time applying those tools. It's almost like they would forget. It's like if you go to the gym or something like that, if you're walking or you're doing whatever you're doing, and you notice you might feel a little better, but may not notice really big, powerful benefits or whatever. And then you spend a little more time and a little more time, and eventually you're like, wow, you know what? This overall quality of my health, blah blah blah, whatever. Well, a lot of things I was kind of feeling and noticing in the personal development world and spiritual worlds of um, commerce, I guess you could say, the industries, was very much these superficial kind of band-aid approaches to things. And I was wondering, like, why? I love this client, but why is she coming back to me 3 months later with the same thing? I love working with this person, but this is the same story they shared with me last year with a different face in a different place. Like, what's going on here? And I started to get really frustrated. Like, what can I do in this work that doesn't feel so fleeting? And I realized that it needed to go deeper and it needed to be more personal, which meant they needed to find their own way. They needed to know how to unpack their own stuff, but also to get in touch with the different parts of them that they were resisting the whole time. So they were actually using some of these modalities and tools to escape the thing that wanted their attention, which I felt and believe is part of our shadow self. And so that was the other part of the audience. So there's a line in there. And I kind of make fun of this, but I don't, because I love this woman so much. So I hope that comes across in what I'm about to say. But there's one of my favorite all-time books and inspirations is written by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And she wrote a book called Women Who Run with Wolves. And it's been in the top bestseller list for 20 years. It's sold millions of copies. It's kind of like a women's Bible for empowerment, for lack of a better way to say it. But but it's also very Jungian, very deep, and it's edgy and it's amazing. And so every like couple weeks, this book was coming up, and it was coming up, and all of these clients and people I were working with that loved this book, they were obsessed with it, and I was like, this is so incredible, but why aren't you healing? Why aren't you moving forward? Why aren't, not in a judgmental, but like curiosity, like this is such amazing content, but why are the people not, why is nothing happening for them? And so when I was writing my book, I did a little nod to her in a way where I said, this is for the women who want to run with the wolves and not just read about them. And it's one of those, like, we can be learners and observe, but if we're not integrating, if we're not embodying the material, if we're not getting out of our heads and into the body, because that's really what wisdom is. When you bring it into your tissues, into your bones, into your soul, that's wisdom. It's knowledge when it's just up in your head. And that doesn't really serve us. It doesn't give us the full range of experience. And I attribute that a lot to shadow qualities too. We could be amazing learners. We could be people obsessed with knowledge and insight and always be hungry and seeking for more. But if we don't ever stop to ask some deeper questions and let that material work on us, reflect on it, contemplate it, we're leaving out this whole other side of us.
Yeah. Making us into the better version of ourselves, the integration process. One of the things that I was looking here at some of the reviews and the ideas and some of the things is the use of, and I'm going to say it one way, and you may say it the other way, but I'm going to say it the way I was taught. Hecate the Crone goddess, basically, if she was in the Greek origin, but I prefer to think of her as a Chaldean goddess. But anyways, this is the world soul. I do believe that you're working with, right? And when I see Hecate, for example, I see her more of a chthonic guide, if you will. She's the gatekeeper of the rising and the descending. And I'm just curious about this use within this book and what you were teasing out to open up, in this case, the women who are going to read this, but what you're trying to tease out by using this specific liminal goddess.
In this book, I rely more on the fairy tales than the myths. For that reason, that I do a lot of work with the dark goddesses, but I also try to look at the archetypal energy, which is that's one of the things I love about Jungian psychology that's often misunderstood is a lot of people think that you boil the archetypes down to these boxes, these figures, this is what they look like, these are their qualities. And it's frustrating to me because on one hand, it is helpful. The qualities give us an idea of what it is we can tap into and work with, but I feel like it's kind of like dream analysis, right? When I work with somebody who's had a nightmare, and they say, "Well, just tell me the book where I can go look up these symbols," I'm going to say, "That's great, but that's not what your psyche is trying to say about those symbols." So if we can say, "What is your psyche trying to say in relationship to Hecate, Hecate, however, how I just say it a million different ways, or Persephone, Lilith, all of the dark goddesses." Then you experience that essence and it feels more somatic versus logical. It feels more like it, I'm being forced to speak up right now. And my whole body is shutting down because I'm going into fight or flight or freeze mode. But my soul's kind of prompting me to say this thing because if I don't say this thing, it's going to eat away at me from the inside. That can be the archetypal essence of Hecate or Lilith or another showing up and saying, no more. This is killing you. You're not going to keep doing this. And I'm going to be here in your consciousness to show you another way to push you. So those essences are so incredible to work with from that angle. Now that, of course, like you said too, BT, there's not just one way, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of working through the qualities because I think that's so helpful and it gives us a little bit of something to hold on to, and we need that. But I just love the energetic, emotional, intuitive presence, the way that these beings will materialize through the nervous system. And when we track and trace them that way, it is just undeniable. I've had the most incredible synchronicities. My clients will share these synchronicities, and they are just undeniable. It's really hard to talk yourself out of this cool, amazing transformational experience when you're paying attention to all the ways that these things are presenting themselves, going, hey, I'm here. This is real. And here's how you know it. So that is a really important part of the book, is getting into that symbolic sort of perspective, because it takes some work. It takes some training. You have to learn how to get your ego to really kind of, it's going to interfere. It's going to try to put things in boxes and make sense of them. But it's about surrendering the ego over and over so that we learn how to receive more of the information that's beneath the surface that it's kind of trying to keep out of our field of vision.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot that a lot of, even my own research looking at the shadow self and this, I'm going to use the word idea, and I don't mean it in any derogatory way, but this idea of the shadow. And I'm hearing a lot of people say that it really speaks to us in a more of a symbolic way. And I think that has to do with the way our conscious mind has barriers, has walls that are up and designed to stop these truth moments. Think of it as like our brains have a firewall against has a firewall against the virus of our actual selves, right? I mean, it's a kind of a goofy way of looking at it, but why are we looking at this? Or do we know why the shadow talks to us symbolically besides my own personal ideas? I mean, what is it that it needs to come at us this way?
That's one of the ways the ego will let the information in. So there's other ways for sure, but you're speaking to one of the ones that's a little bit easier, especially for somebody new. And of course, if there's trauma, right? I mean, who doesn't have some impactful moment or something that's occurred? But the more intense those circumstances are, the more defenses we might have. And so if you think of it, I love the firewall example, but think of the shadow kind of sitting beneath all of that. And so the ego is kind of that gatekeeper between it all. And so symbols are one of the ways that the psyche, the unconscious, presents us with material. That the ego, which is kind of part of how we discern things. So if you've ever had a dream that made no sense, or at least you thought at first it made no sense, it might have just been a collection of random colors, people, the wrong face on the wrong whatever, like things that don't really logically all make sense. That was the path of least resistance because you were in a sleep state, the ego wasn't interfering in the process. So sometimes it's the only way it can reach us. That's one of the reasons it'll speak in a symbol is because it's, and it's not a logical linear thing. That's the ego actually causing a lot of that. And so sometimes it's very intuitive, but that can also be a felt sense. So we can experience shadow through feeling. It isn't just about the images that pop into our minds, although that, of course, is one way. But if you've ever been in a conversation with someone and you have just a certain thing that you don't love, you don't like, maybe you've got some history with a certain word, right? There's just something about it you don't like or how it was used in your childhood or something else. And somebody else, not knowing any of that, can use that word or whatever, and it just hits the wrong way and you feel it. It's got a charge to it. So that's the other way that the shadow can speak to us is through these emotional charges we feel around a certain subject or idea. I see this a lot with topics in general, like taboo topics. I work a lot with women and I work with men as well. But for some reason, for women more so, I'd say there's a really big edge for them at the topic of money. And so it's so interesting, right? And it's not like we're all sitting around talking to each other saying, hey, we should all be limited in this capacity, right? It's just there's these different rules and unspoken rules and societal expectations. That's what governs the ego in the first place. So the shadow is sitting beneath all of that. And so sometimes we fear listening closer or understanding. So symbols are one way it reaches us. The energetic charge is another way that it reaches us through different impressions, things like that. If we're willing to pay attention, metaphors are another way that shadow material is actually assimilated. If somebody shares a metaphor and you're like, oh my gosh, that really struck a chord in the best way. That's shadow material. It isn't just negative. It's also really cool, amazing things that are waiting for you to embrace them, that need the right circumstances to come to fruition. Then the ego goes, aha, yes, this is awesome. Insight. That's what the ego does. And then it lets it through. So synchronicities are also a language of what is hidden, what's in shadow, the alignment of things, we might say, meaningful coincidence, right? Things that coincide, come together. But some of it shows us the deeper, invisible, like hidden order that exists within all things. And so the ego, it has this innate sort of, because it's trying to keep us alive and to be mindful of, everything that's going on and look for threats or things that could cause us harm. Change is one of the biggest things that threatens the ego. So even people who are like, well, I want to connect more to my intuition. I want to see more. I want to sense more. I want to feel more. I want to be more in touch with these hidden parts of me. We can say that all day long, but the ego will demonstrate the opposite and keep us from that. So while we're in that process of learning how to surrender it over and over and over again, creative imagery is one of the ways to very easily bypass the ego a little more so it doesn't feel so threatened, because that's when it puts up that wall, which we might call a defense also.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that. The the aim to work on ourselves, right? This is, I think, one of the best things to do, but we're usually not, because we want to distract ourselves from it. We know a lot of people who go, well, I need to do this, and this, and then they absolutely abhor doing nothing, right? They cannot sit with themselves in silence. These kind of books that are designed to give a little bit of self work, I find are incredibly helpful for people to pick it up and say, hey, maybe I do have these issues. I mean, we all have some kind of end resultant from our own traumas, right? Whatever it makes us into on who we are today. If we're jaded or we're, trust no one, these little things that we have. This is all from some kind of past. But my curiosity here is what are we doing? What are we doing to ourselves by ignoring our shadow?
Oh, well, we temporarily are thinking that we're getting away with something. There's like this brief period, and I don't know that this is always conscious, but the distraction and the numbing and all the things, we're distancing ourselves from something, on some level, whether it's something big, something small, it doesn't matter. There's something going on. And one of the things I like to name it as resistance, because I feel like that kind of takes away some of its power. And a lot of work with shadow really is that it's working on resistance. And when you're talking about the work, something that I've kind of started to reframe for myself is that I'm unfolding. Because I started to feel like this is just a lot of work all the time, confronting fears and overcoming doubts and limitations. And right. And it's like, at what point do we get to enjoy life if we're always working on ourselves, if we're always digging into the past, we're always trying to heal a trauma and what have you? And I realized that that was also my ego trying to basically make meaning of things or be in control or find some sense of order, which is a lot of the pieces of what it does. But when I come back to this idea that we're unfolding, we're actually just becoming who we're already designed to become. It's more like, oh, okay, there is a softening in that, even just hearing that. When I say those words out loud, I feel my body relaxing. I feel my nervous system shifting, going, well, okay, wait, I don't have to hold this. I don't have to figure that out. I don't have to know it all. I don't have to protect myself. I don't have to worry about this. Like, it's just these small moments of softening the resistance. Because when you do that, what is beneath, what's already emerging from within, whether you identify with the language of the soul or the self, whatever it might be, that has its own intelligence. And I know that to be true for myself. And so there is a natural impulse that it has where it's driving us through life, not driving in a typical ego sense of like achievement, but more this unfolding of who we are. So James Hillman would call that, the mighty oak from the acorn, right? It's programmed to become this mighty oak. And I do believe that. I do believe that we have this innate intelligence within us. I don't think it's necessarily about a purpose or a vocation or a certain calling even necessarily, but I do think it's a series of things that are just unfolding within us that we're leaning into and we're following along on our path. And as we do that, we bump up against these, we would call them in fairy tales, the ordeals, right? Or the impossible tasks that you have to do. And there's moments where you feel like, I'm just not going to be able to do this, and then we have something we would call initiations, where there's this tension, there's this thing that happens that forces you onto a different path. And so all of that can look like resistance. It can show up in a traumatic event. It can show up in a moment of uncertainty, a dark night of the soul, or something else. But it's still like an unfolding of the self that's leading us through. And so working with shadow doesn't even have to just be about the hard work of the digging in. Sometimes it's the excitement and magic of, I get to re-enchant my life and get back in touch with that wonder I used to have as a child, when the world wasn't trying to put me in a box or tell me how I should be or how I should think. So part of it is also the unraveling of all of these different things, and that challenges the ego. So it's that idea of resistance again. Sometimes what we're actually feeling is the reverberation, like the world showing us these different, pieces, these things that still are unfinished, or that we get to lean into and learn from. But we're so afraid of that. We identify it with being painful. We associate with it meaning that it's going to cause us harm. And we misread and misinterpret those cues and signals as if we should be running away from that instead of leaning into it. And then we actually cause ourselves more harm, because then we use substances or people or circumstances or ideas to buffer us. And those impulses beneath the surface don't go away. They just fester. There's this idea that whatever you push down into shadow just festers and grows, and it's going to come out in the most inconvenient of times if we don't learn how to lean into it.
Without actually having the physical copy of the book, it's hard for me to draw good things out of this. It's okay. The main work that you are working on is specifically Jungian psychology. And if listeners haven't figured that out by now, that's a thing I do. A lot of my episodes do end up either being by myself as Shadow Shorts, dealing with some kind of Jungian psychology or esotericism or any kind of views. And I think the main reason why I do this is because people have an unlimited choice to what they want to listen to. And if they do a search and it's like, hey, I want to listen to Jungian stuff, and this particular episode comes up, that's great. There's no requirement that everybody listens to every single one of my episodes. It's not at all anything that I find necessary. And I think that it's a great opportunity to give individuals who go, look, this Christian stuff, this doesn't work for me. This Buddhist stuff, it doesn't work for me. This atheism, this is working. This agnosticism, this is working. And I think that every opportunity that we have to become better should never be skipped over. And this book here, this book, The Apothecary of the Afflicted, seems to fit into a need, right? I think that everything needs to be done for a need. It's, otherwise it is just self-promotion and self-ego. And honestly, if we believe Jung at all, we shouldn't be doing that. And I'm just curious.
I really think Jung would hate to think that there were Jungians in the world too.
I know, really, probably would.
It's kind of funny, right?
It's just that I'm looking at this idea of apothecary for the afflicted, and there's stuff in here that we can use to work on ourselves. I'm curious as to what you think. Is it emotions? Is it feelings? Is it sensations? What is the thing that many of us, men or women, find ourselves turned off of when it's time to look at shadow and look at ourselves and look at our traumas and try to become better?
It's a really great question. And I really think it depends on the person. I think it's all of that. So there's something else that is a part of Jungian psychology that I find valuable. I'm not 100% sold on its application across the board. Just want to give a little disclaimer on this piece of it. But it's something called typology. And, Myers-Briggs is a form of typology that was actually created from the roots of Jungian typology. And the idea is that you have these certain layers of your personality. So it's another tool, kind of like, astrologically, we can look at an astrology chart and say, okay, here's all the things that come together that converge in this way that might tell you this very in-depth story about who you are. And typology can do the same thing. The reason that I think this is significant to answer your question is because some of us are wired to be more sensate, while others are more intuitive, while others are more thinkers. There's a little bit of everything. And of course, we have all these abilities, all this capacity, right, to for all of the different functions. But for example, I have one of the rare forms of typology, which is called the INFP. And the first two letters of that are introverted, intuitive. And the reason that's significant is because for me, the things that usually catch me in shadow that I have to work on really hard compared to someone else is sensory information. So, an example is that my intuition is my dominant function, which means it's the one I rely on instantaneously the most. And I give this example with my clients when I'm trying to kind of show them that like intuition and sensation are two different things, even though we interpret it almost as the same. I noticed something happening that I thought was kind of bizarre. One of the ways that I decompress and I help to release energy and emotions, because I do work in some really deep territory with my clients, I carry a lot of that, and I've learned over the years to try to be better about not carrying it, but I still do. So I will take a hot bath, right? And so I'll put my salts in the tub and the whole thing. And I notice that when I go to put either my hand in the water to gauge the temperature, it's not instant. It takes seconds before I recognize the temperature of the water. And it's a very strange thing. And it's been with me my whole life. It's a where there's other people they can like automatically tell that it's hot or cold right away. It's almost as if I have a 2 or 3 second delay. What I didn't know is this is an example of someone who has a dominant intuitive function, which means you then will have your opposing function in shadow. Mine happens to be sensation that's in shadow. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean I don't feel it. It's just not as dominant. It's not my go-to. So this means when I've got something going on in my life, if I'm avoidant, if I'm resistant, if I'm having an issue with it, it likely can be a sensation that I've been ignoring, haven't been paying attention to, don't want to think about. And so then it'll have to show up in my dream. Because if I'm sleeping and I have this thing play out in my dream, I'll wake up and I'll write down my dream and I analyze it and I go, oh my gosh, this is going on. And then I sit back and go, wait a minute, my body's been trying to tell me that for weeks. But because sensation is something that is a little bit more distant for me in my typology, I might not get the message, the feeling, the somatic connection right away. Now I know other people that are the opposite. I know people that are more of their dominant trait might be thinking. And again, we all, like, as an intuitive, I still am a great thinker and researcher and all of that. But sometimes it's the details I'll get tripped up on because thinking can also be in shadow. So it might be one of those things where you're just like, oh my gosh, how did I miss this glaring detail? Right. Now, the thinkers, though, will struggle with intuition. They will be the ones to go, oh, I did have a dream about that, but I just dismissed it. Or, the mind and making connections and coming to conclusions in a very analytical, methodical way through analysis of that kind, through mathematics, through things that make logical sense, that have a clear path from A to Z. The thinkers of that kind might be less connected to intuitive impressions. And therefore, if they are getting an image, let's say they're around somebody who maybe isn't good for them, or, and I don't mean that the person's bad, but sometimes the pattern is not healthy, right? And that thinker might sense it. They might have a feeling. They might walk away and go, wow, I feel really depleted. But they're not paying attention to how depleted they are. Instead, they might be ruminating and thinking about the qualities of the person. That might be the thing that gets their attention first before they pay attention to those deeper layers. So that's one way I would really answer that, to say a lot of it can have to do with our typology, where we might feel more or less connected to that type of input: sensory information, intellectual information, intuitive information. And I know in a traditional sense, sensory information and intuitive information sound like the same thing. But again, one of them can be more image, impression, things that pop into mind, where another can be very through the body, physical, a tightening in the chest, butterflies in the stomach, right? There can be a very somatic sort of different thing, but they are deeply connected and integrated. But that's something to get to know about ourselves is, okay, when I resist, how do I push information away? What's my comfort zone? When I'm learning something, when I feel safe or I feel excited, how do I believe and trust? Is it through my intuition? Is it through my logic? Is it through something else? But those can be a really significant part of why someone may or may not listen.
And I think there's value in having helps, right? Guides along the way. And I believe that books like this, why they may not be, they're not the end. They're really just the beginning. There's something to get us off the couch of our minds and into some kind of action. And I think there's value in knowing that there are people out there who are writing these books. But more than that, with you, Kim, or Melissa, you have resources available for people to take the next step. And let's talk about that for a moment, that you have that available for people. They've read the book, they're trying to work on this, but they need to take the next step and they need a little bit of help. So what do you have available to help people who need that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. So first thing I would say is the book itself starts out with a couple of really cool practices that are meant to be ongoing. So one thing I would just reaffirm is, in the beginning of the book, I do teach people how to create something called a darkness journal. And this is where I teach them how to, in our society, we're so conditioned, watch what we say, how we show up, how we speak about people. And then also when it comes to like certain spiritual principles or ideas, people are very hung up on what they put in writing and how they speak it. They're afraid they're going to speak something into existence or manifest it with their words. And yet I look at it like, let's liberate your body and your psyche of these things that are kind of haunting you. So I teach them how to do a darkness journal. And even though that's included in the book, it is a tool I use every single day. It's a tool I over and over again come back to with my clients, whether they just started working with me a week ago, or I have clients I've been working with for over 10 years now, consistently. And I will come back to that tool over and over because it's an ongoing process to learn how to unburden the heart, how to get the emotions out of the body, to clear space for what listening to the soul, to the authentic self. So that is one tool that I recommend that is easily accessible to anyone. All you need is a journal, a pen, and the willingness to drop a lot of F-bombs or whatever you want to say or do. But it's so liberating and cathartic. So that's the first thing. I do take on a small amount of private clients that I work with. My days are filled right now. I'm very blessed with the work that I do, but that is something that I offer on occasion when spots open up, that I do work with private clients. I usually will have them work with me for 4 to 6 sessions, because sometimes the first 2 we're feeling safe and comfortable, and then it takes some time to go a little bit deeper. I also have numerous courses and classes and things on my website that are all different approaches to the same kind of work with a different amount of depth and commitment to them. So I have things from a $20 meditation that you can listen to calm the mind and just get into an open and receptive state, all the way up to like $1,000 full-on training on narcissism through the myth of Narcissus and Echo for deeply sensitive people. So a little bit of everything for everyone. But I would say my favorite things these days to help people, to provide information and support, is my Substack. I'm offering quite a bit of content on there, writing tools, things that are accessible. I'm probably about 70% of it is free. So it's not like a huge commitment either, anything like that. And then if you do want the deeper dives or the bonus kind of things, you can sign up. And I think it's like $100 for the whole year to be a member to get all sorts of material. But yeah, I like to create a wide range of offerings for people because I know we're all in different places. And I was very blessed that before I could put myself in a position to go to grad school and become an official, like learning about Jungian, whatever from that level, books helped me, things helped me. Free guides, free introductory things were a part of helping me get on that path. And so it's important that we have resources, that where we can help each other, support each other with. So.
Yeah, and we can't play down that you have your own podcast.
Oh, yes, that's true. I do have a podcast. It's called A Dose of Depth with Melissa Kim Korter. It's been a solo act for like the first 10 episodes, just kind of trying to find this mixture between film, forensics, and fairy tales. And I started to take on some true crime cases and show the parallels with different fairy tales and some of the deeper lessons around that. So yeah, it's like a fun side project. I don't have a lot of, I've got like 10 or 12 episodes now. It's something I enjoy, but I'm kind of keeping it like, once a month or so. So we'll see what happens next year. Next year, I feel like I'll be ramping it up more.
Fantastic. Wonderful. And like, your website is your name. I mean, it'll be in the show notes. So that's easy enough to remember. And, what do we have to look forward to? I mean, what's on your plans for 2026?
Good question. I'm open. So hopefully finishing my dissertation, fingers crossed. I have my second manuscript is due. It's another book on shadow work, but it's going to be more of a codex. That's all I can really say. A little bit more of a deeper dive into some more linear practices and things of that nature that will be coming out in the fall of 2026. I have another course coming up at the Shift Network. I'm really excited about that. That'll be this March of 2026. We're still honing in on the specific theme, but as it stands now, it's looking like it's going to be around the archetype of the glass child, which is an interesting psychological construct around being invisible, but also being the strength of the family. Some people identify that with like the black sheep and these different layers, but that is going to be in March. And yeah, and then just doing what I do, the research and the writing and traveling. I want to go to Romania in 2026. I have this vision also of going to Romania and then bringing people back as in like tours and different things there. So 2026 is the year that I'm going to go explore with my husband and go check it out and see what kind of cool magical thing I can put together in Romania.
That'd be awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and talking to me today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be back.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
It's a very strange, funny time where everybody would love to be able to be themselves, but they can't because they must fall in line with the person in front of them.
The terrible thing about searching for the truth is that sometimes you find it.
You take the red pill. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. You stay in Wonderland. Believe whatever you want to believe.
See, the more at peace you become, the less you tolerate chaos. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you.
You want to live that kind of life? I wish you the best. I'll be on the other side somewhere, you know.
Protecting your peace isn't about shutting the world out. It's about keeping your inner world clear enough to hear your own soul.
My experience, you spend a lot of time thinking about the pain from your past. Well, it's probably not a good thing. Most people don't handle it well. Take care of yourself.
The truth, nothing more.